In any concerto, there's a confrontation between individual and group, soloist and orchestra. This confrontation is what makes the concerto form distinctive and ultimately is at the core of its design. Although a concerto might resemble a symphony in its overall form, many of its memorable moments should come from that confrontation. But there are actually many possible relationships between an individual and a group. The individual can lead or follow, take part in the group or reject it, and so on. Analysis classes never seem to talk about this, but it's basic to a composer's way of thinking about the concerto form. In this lesson, we'll look at Beethoven's Fourth Piano Concerto and catalog some of the possible interactions between the solo piano and the orchestra. In Beethoven's time, the concerto usually started rather like a symphony, presenting various thematic material in an extended orchestral passage without the soloist. The soloist normally only entered after this initial orchestral exposition. Here Beethoven tries something very new at the time. The soloist starts the movement alone, in G major. Then the strings come in with the same material, but at a distant key, B major. This straightforward little dialogue between individual and group is made special by the fact that both the piano solo and the orchestra start off with the same melodic note, but with very different harmony. This is the simplest relationship between solo and orchestra. One appears after the other, alone, presenting similar material. Next, the orchestra presents the theme again, back in G major, in a more imitative texture. Now things proceed rather as in a typical Mozart concerto, exposing more material in the orchestra alone. But the piano's arrival at the start leaves us wondering what its destiny will be. Why was it so prominent just to disappear so soon? The next time the piano comes in, it replies alone to the orchestra with the motive just heard, the same one as in the opening theme. But this time the dialogue takes a different turn. The motive simplifies and speeds up into a little repeated note formula, at which point the orchestra insists once again on the omnipresent repeated note motive. After a quick scale descending and rising back up, the piano then has a solo with material of its own. Here the orchestra is just background, supporting the piano. Let's listen. This is another very common kind of interaction between soloist and orchestra. They're heard together, but the foreground is flexible, moving back and forth between them. At rehearsal C, the piano becomes much more active, careening around with quick arpeggios. Now the piano accompanies the orchestra, which punctuates the arpeggios with that upbeat motive once again. But the word accompaniment does not really do justice to what's happening here, for the piano is also adding a level of energy that very much enhances the overall momentum. This is the liveliest music we've had up till here. Now the piano introduces a new theme in the right hand. But here the accompaniment is shared between the piano's left hand, which provides movement, and the orchestra, adding rich, sustained strings in the background. This is a more complex texture, one of several such possibilities inherent in the concerto idea. After some more dialogue, the music modulates to the dominant, where another theme arrives at rehearsal D. Now the bassoon, and then the clarinet, present a singing line while the strings fill out the harmony with the repeated note motive. The piano dances around the woodwind line in a kind of heterophony, using a chromatic double Niebuhr motive. Here the orchestra returns to a theme previously presented during the long orchestral exposition which has never yet appeared in the piano. After a few modulating bars, the theme comes back in C major, with the piano supplying flowing figuration around it. Note that the piano part is not just empty passage work. It has little non-harmonic tone flourishes that give it color and personality. The cliché idea of a concerto is just a piece to show off the soloist, and often concertos by second-rate composers are like that. But Beethoven goes to a great deal of trouble here to compose rich figuration. I call this quasi-counterpoint. On the occasions when Beethoven does use simpler arpeggio figuration, as here, the line is arranged to have a specific memorable contour, in this case a series of rising waves. Note also the accompaniment here in the orchestra, as it exchanges two motives in invertible counterpoint between strings and winds. Again, the piano adds momentum and energy. Now let's look at the second movement of this concerto. Here Beethoven has invented a completely new kind of concerto texture. The movement is short and based on two ideas. The first one, that appears right away in the orchestra, is rather assertive in character, loud with lots of abrupt dotted rhythms. The second one appears when the piano enters, and it's lyrical, rather introspective. Throughout the movement, orchestra and piano each continue to present their respective ideas, but without managing to influence the other, rather like two people talking but unwilling to really listen to one another. The piano eventually becomes more expansive with a high singing line. Now the orchestra is reduced to just the barest pizzicato accompaniment. Then the piano presents a somewhat more energetic cadenza, eventually quieting down to a simpler cadence. The orchestra then returns with its original motive, but now very, very quietly in the bass. Even more striking is the mysterious sustained E pedal in the upper strings. The formerly assertive theme has now completely changed character, becoming much more tentative. 6 bars before the end of the movement, the dotted note motive disappears completely. The piano intervenes with the last sigh in its original character, and then has a very slow arpeggio and appoggiatura over the last chord. Beethoven here has transformed the confrontation into a kind of sad, peaceful sharing between the two actors. The sensitive individual has succeeded in calming down the aggressive group. The effect is extraordinarily poignant. This is thinking about the possibilities of the concerto situation at a very deep level, never before attempted. The contrast between individual and group is clearly a social metaphor. It doesn't take much effort to imagine how potent this would be in real life.